Hey everyone, Dave Brown here with the New Populace. Thank you again for joining me. So, we had the U.S. Treasury Secretary go to China to meet with Chinese officials and try to warm up this struggling American and Chinese relationship. And for the most part, I think she did that a little bit. But there was one big controversy that has really uh, detracted attention away from the issues, and that is the issue of her, Janet Yellen, bowing to an official in China. And some Americans reacted pretty negatively about that. Whereas in China, people are saying, well, this was just an act of respect. It's not like you're submitting yourself. There's no reason for Americans to be so upset. And this really just represents two cultures that just fundamentally don't quite understand each other. And I think that's really the issue here. But there is an interesting article in the Global Times written by the editorial board that I want to read because it really gives the perspective from the East. And I want to read it and then sort of give my American perspective to sort of balance it out. And maybe we can sort of better understand each other. So the article is called Who Would Think That Yellen is Kowtowing to China? The Global Times editorial. The scene of U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen making a courtesy bow during a meeting with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng in Beijing on Saturday has left some Americans irritated and rankled. Yellen has returned to the U.S., and these people are still criticizing her, claiming that she seems to be summoned to the principal's office and is kowtowing to China, showing weakness, and so on. Some former U.S. officials even shouted, "Never, ever, ever. An American official does not bow." This shows the extent to which American public opinion is allergic to Chinese elements. When watching Yellen's past videos, it is not difficult to find that this is one of her habitual actions. If it hadn't caused such a strong reaction in American society, few Chinese people would have noticed this detail. The Chinese people would not have been so naive as to think that Yellen was kowtowing to China. They tend to consider her move as a courteous performance which will not only objectively add to her personal charm, but also somewhat improve the impression of the U.S. and its officials on Chinese society. Humility is a respected virtue in China, a country of etiquette, and it is impossible for someone to be criticized for being humble and observant. The opposite of humility is arrogance. Who would like an arrogant person or country? The most prominent feature of some American officials who never bow is arrogance. It can be seen from this unexpected incident that Yellen's humility is only an isolated case in the U.S. and cannot represent or change the characteristics or overall style of the U.S. diplomacy and officials. American public opinion's attack on Yellen has drawn back the emotional distance between China and the U.S. that she has narrowed with their personal qualities, and once again proves how narrow the space is for rational decision making and behavior in the U.S. China policy. And let me stop right here. So, bowing. Why was this such a strong? Why was there such a strong reaction from the United States? So let me give you the American side of it. So, of course, our history, 1776. We declare independence from the UK, from England. And one of our motivating factors was that we wanted to establish a country without a monarch, and we have, of course, a constitutional republic. So for Americans, we look at bowing in the context of submitting to a sovereign. So you would bow to King George back in 17 whatever, 1770, 1760. You'd bow to King George. You would submit. You're his subject. So for Americans, we strongly look at bowing as an act of submission and lowering yourself beneath somebody else. That's why when President Obama years ago kind of did a half bow to, I think, the Saudi king, people freaked out because here we have the president of the United States, who's supposed to be the leader of our country, bowing, which again for us is an act of submission and lowering yourself to another head of state. So that's how Americans view bowing. Now, I think in Japan, for example, they bow, but if it's done mutually, we kind of accept that because it's equal thing. There's it's reciprocated. So both sides are bowing. That's fine. But when one side bows and the other doesn't bow, we look at that as lowering oneself. And this again, it goes back to the American attitude. We were renegades. We were people who were explorers. We were leaving Europe and coming to the new world. So the American mindset is very independent minded. Very maybe you could view it as being arrogant, but that's our history and background and why we view bowing so differently than other countries. And China has a very, very, very long history. I mean, you compare Chinese history to our history; it's miles longer. So your cultural things have been around for such a long time and are deeply embedded. Whereas we're a younger culture, and we don't have a historical background going back a long time. We were defectors, renegades who escaped Europe and wanted to establish a completely new country and a new idea, and that's what we did here in the United States, and that's why we are so different than everyone else. But let me finish this article. The hegemony shown in the controversy over the Yellen bow video in the American public opinion is precisely the reason why Chinese society is subconsciously wary of Washington. Few Chinese people would naively think that Yellen, who has shown humility, will compromise or be weak during the Chinese-U.S. talks, and the facts have proven this. The mainstream perception of the U.S. in Chinese society is highly sober, emphasizing reciprocity while also being unwavering on issues of sovereignty, security, and the right to develop. Yellen's bowing gesture demonstrated rare goodwill and politeness from a U.S. official, but it was swiftly dispersed by these distorted winds of American public opinion. And that reminds me of Anthony Blinken going to China, being very friendly as much as he could, coming back home to the United States just to have Joe Biden call Xi a dictator and kind of undid all that. So I guess here they're saying the same thing. Yellen came over and was nice, but then American public opinion is making a big deal of this bow, so now we sort of undid all that. The decline of American hegemony first occurs within the minds of some Americans. In today's U.S., it seems whoever is expressing some friendly gesture to China is seen as kowtowing to China. This is an irrational mentality stemming from a relative position of psychological weakness, seeking psychological compensation by maintaining a posture of strength. The U.S. remains the world's sole superpower. However, its arrogance, fragility, and sensitivity in dealing with foreign powers, particularly China, are derivatives from its severely damaged confidence in the face of China's rapid development. All countries should draw lessons and experiences from this. It's pretty strong language. I would disagree with the characterization here. Again, it's yes, we are the world superpower, and yes, we do view China as a threat. which is why we become more hostile. But I wouldn't quite take it like the psychological weakness. That's again, if this is the a Chinese newspaper and owned by or funded by the Chinese government. So, um, as some Americans were finding it hard to accept that Yellen bowed, another picture of Yellen having a meal with a few young Chinese female economists also sparked controversy on the Chinese internet. The attendees received criticism from many netizens. It must be said that these. Oops, did I miss one in here? Oh no. It um, must be said that while the two incidents may seem similar, the situations are different. It is normally common and indisputable for government officials to have meals with local individuals during foreign visits as a form of public diplomacy. However, U.S. officials often exploit this format to intervene and interfere in other countries' internal affairs, which we have to guard against. Some reactions on the Chinese internet reflect the chilling effect caused by the long term suppression of China by the U.S., which has influenced Chinese public sentiment toward the U.S. It is said before the lunch, Yellen took out a prepared speech and delivered it, which the U.S. also published afterwards. In the speech, she stated that while the U.S. has differences with the Chinese government, there are not disagreements with the Chinese people, which carries an obvious intent to sow discord. So I think this is interesting. So Yellen meets with some economists, these female economists. She says, while we have some issues with the Chinese government, we are we are not in conflict with the Chinese people. And the Global Times here interprets that as an obvious intent to sow discord. I'm going to suggest you're being a little bit paranoid here. If the U.S. wants to be subversive toward your public, we will do a lot worse than that. Not just say, hey, our two sides, our people, we can get along even if our governments have some friction. That's what she said there. So I think that is slightly paranoid. The different reactions in China and to the U.S. to these two incidents fully illustrate the complexity and delicacy of the U.S. China relationship. Ultimately, this stems from the U.S.'s flawed perception of China and its unhealthy political ecosystem, which generates strong emotions in both Chinese and American societies, in turn, affecting the bilateral relationship and creating a vicious cycle. Correcting this abnormal state depends crucially on whether the U.S. can make substantive adjustments. So, I want to read you what Yellen said at this lunch. It's very short, and you tell me if this was an attempt to be subversive and to sow discord with the Chinese public. And this comes from the Secretary of State's office. Remarks by Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen at lunch with female economists and entrepreneurs of the People's Republic of China. It is great to see you all. Thank you for joining me for lunch. I am in Beijing at this critical time because, for all the disagreements between our nations, President Biden and I believe it is in the best interest of our peoples to put our relationship on a better track and to maintain open and honest lines of communication. I strongly believe that the relationship between our two countries is rooted in the solid ties between the American and Chinese people. It is important that we keep nurturing and deepening these ties, especially as China reopens after 3 years of COVID lockdowns. Let me be clear, while the U.S. has differences with the Chinese government, these are not disagreements with the Chinese people. In fact, we are proud to have millions of Chinese immigrants in the United States who enrich our communities. We are eager to welcome Chinese tourists to our country and Chinese students to our schools and universities. China remains among the most represented countries among international students in the United States. Our people share many things in common, far more than our differences. I understand that you are economists. As you may know, I am an economist too. I began my career in economics in the 1970s and pursued a career in labor economics before becoming a central banker and now a Treasury Secretary. Over the course of my career, I've seen China's adoption of market-based economic policies that have transformed the country and lifted many hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It is my hope for the benefit of both China and the United States, as well as for broader global economy, that these policies are carried out moving forward. I know we share similar stories and experiences about what a career in economics is like and the challenges you can face when you're the only woman in the room or at the decision-making table. I am eager to hear about your backgrounds and research, including what got you interested in economics in the first place and how you see your career progressing. Thank you again for taking time to join me. I look forward to our lunch. So, in my opinion, this statement is relatively innocuous. It's not, she isn't really going too far anywhere. She basically says, let's get along. I'm a woman. You are women too. It's, it could be a challenge. Maybe it's a little dash of feminism. But overall, I don't really find that statement to be trying to sow discord among the public. So I think the Times here maybe has a little bit of paranoia, and that was the sort of the general tone throughout the entire article. This sort of a kind of paranoia toward the U.S. But that being said, U.S. government officials do talk about containing China economically and militarily. We do view you as our greatest rival, so there may be some reason to have that paranoia. And as I mentioned in my past videos, the issue with Taiwan and the U.S. trying to inflame tensions there. I understand. I understand the paranoia there. I understand it, but it was a little sharp there, a little sharp. I find both these incidences, the bow and the speech before the lunch, as being overblown by everybody. But when you are in tense times, the smallest things get put under under a microscope, and then everybody looks at it so carefully and closely, and sometimes they read too much into a certain thing. So I think that's what's happening here. But our cultures, they're different, and how we interpret situations is going to be different, and that's what we're going to need to work on if we want to come together and have a calmer, more relaxed relationship, which is what would be good for not just China and the United States. It would be good for the entire world because we are the two biggest economies in the world, and if we don't get along, that's not good for anyone. Well, that's it for now. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.